There.
Sorry. Oh, did you get it? Okay.
This meeting is being.
I think it's just a notice that it's being recorded. So
Right.
great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you very much for joining us. This for Tuesday.
Sorry.
And
Oh, did you get it? Okay.
yeah,
This meeting is being.
I think it's just a notice that it's being recorded. So sorry, I'm
Right.
just getting feedback
Great.
here. 1 second. Okay, there we go. Good. Sorry about that. It's with great pleasure tonight that we're going to we'll welcome uh, Daiho Hilbert Roshi, and we'll turn it over to him in a few minutes. Just want to start as we usually do with our acknowledgement. Nobody's on from Lethbridge today, but I kind of feel as though we've neglected the Treaty 7 land acknowledgement. So we'll start with that this evening. So we acknowledge Treaty 7 territory, the traditional and ancestral territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Kainai Pikani Tsikka, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation and Stoney Nakoda First Nation. We acknowledge that this territory is home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3, within the historical Northwest Métis homeland. We acknowledge the many First Nations, Métis and Inuit who have lived in and cared for these lands for generations. We are grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today and those who have gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. Thank you, everybody. So, just wanted to lead off with a couple of announcements before this evening's talk. So for those of you that participated in the survey, thank you very much for doing that. I've compiled things this afternoon, and there's a new Rocky Mountain Zen podcast, audio podcast that you should have access to. I believe it sent it out to everybody this afternoon, and I did a short little episode discussing sort of the survey and the results that came out, and I think there's some interesting things for us to discuss as a community going forward. And so I'd invite you to check out the podcast and check out those survey results, and then we'll probably chat about it down the road here. This Saturday and Sunday. So Saturday we do have we'll have the Zazen and the chanting service, and then Sunday we have our regular Club Zen. Next Tuesday, I'm going to shift gears slightly. There's a special guest from Soto Shu, and I'll send out information. Actually, I think I've already sent it, but I'll resend out the information. There's a special talk that's happening, so I will send out that information to everybody. So we won't meet on this platform and this Zoom account next Tuesday. It'll be on the Zoom account. I'm not sure whose Zoom account it is, but like I said, I'll send out the other information. Let's see. I'm not sure. Okay, do you have anything to add? Anything for?
Sure. So the next week's session, they're using the Satoshi website, the branch office, so sort of semi-public. But yeah, anybody's welcome. Should I add? Well, I mean, I have to mention that I am very happy to meet Senior Zen Peacemaker here, because I'm also one of them. so
Yeah.
Looking forward to it. The talk.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. And for those of you that weren't able to join last night, we had a historical moment for Rocky Mountain Zen and for Angel City Zen, Brad Warner's group on Los Angeles, and also Sozenji it was a triple Sangha Dharma talk last night that was given by Gyoke, and I understand that Dave Cuomo at Angel City says they're going to try and get the talk up on the podcast as soon as possible, because there was a great deal of interest in what you had to say, Gyoke. So it was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. So, right, I think that's it. Other than to say my usual spiel that I don't like to say, but I need to kind of get into the habit of it. Should you feel so inclined and able to do so, we don't have a lot of overhead here at Rocky Mountain Zen, but we do have the Zoom, and we also like to give those teachers that come and speak to us a little bit of dana for their time and their efforts and their and as a sign of appreciation. So there is now a PayPal account for Rocky Mountain Zen, in addition to buy us a cup of coffee. So if you go to the Rocky Mountain Zen website, rockymountainzen.weebly.com, both options are available there. And that is that. So ordinarily I would do a bio introduction of our guest, of our speaker, but my understanding he's going to do a little bit of that as part of his talk this evening. So without further ado, thank you very much, Daiho, Hilbert Roshi, for being with us this evening. And please, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure to be here. The Dharma is incomparably profound and minutely subtle. It's rarely encountered in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We can now see it, hear it, and hold it. May we understand the Tathagata's true meaning. I usually start a talk off with a little bit of my background, because it often sets the stage for, or prepares people to put a context into what I'm going to be saying. And tonight in particular, it's appropriate because we're going to be talking about engaged Buddhism. I came to Zen in 1966. I was a infantry soldier in Vietnam, 19 years old, and on May 29th of that year, my unit got into a serious firefight with the North Vietnamese Regular Army. We were outnumbered 5-1, and we were being, our perimeter was being breached. It was a pretty bad firefight. Anyway, my company commander sent out a 3-person listening post, a 3-person LP. And these were new guys, because you don't want to risk the lives of seasoned soldiers, so you send out the new guys for these risky things. And one of the new guys was somebody I knew. Anyway, they went out about 100 meters or so. It was dark. In rainy season, it was sloppy, wet. And they had little red filtered flashlights that they were supposed to use if the enemy approached. They were supposed to use a red filtered flashlight to safely get across the perimeter as kind of like a password. But what happened was the enemy hadn't gone anywhere. They were simply entrenched. And about midnight, they opened fire on us. And it was really a very scary scene. I mean, we had RPGs, rocket propelled grenades, and machine gun fire, all sorts of bad stuff. The enemy was rushing us, and this 3-person listening post freaked out. They dropped their rifle, or they didn't drop their rifles. They dropped their flashlights and took their rifles and ran toward the perimeter. Well, in the dark, all I saw were soldiers running toward my position, and I shot him. And I killed one. Actually, it was the fellow I knew. His name was Richard Roundtree. But he didn't die right away. I shot him in the guts. He fell about 10 meters off to my left. And then I got shot in the head, which is an interesting story in itself. All of a sudden, I found myself laying on the ground, and I reached up and felt my helmet wasn't there. I reached up and felt my head, and there was a big hole in my head. And I was not unconscious. I was absolutely conscious. And I say to people, I've got to be one of the few human beings that actually has touched his own brain. Anyway, a medic came and put a compressed bandage on my head. I spent the night. This was from around 12:30 in the midnight. I spent that night staying awake, or trying to stay awake, because I believed that if I fell asleep, I would die. So my job was to stay alive. The problem with that was I had to listen to Roundtree die. Gut wounds are very painful, and they're slow to kill. And he cried, and he prayed, and he cried for his mother, and all those kinds of things. And it burned a hole in my heart. I came out of that experience the next morning, medevaced out, angry and hurt, angry at God, angry at my country, angry at all kinds of things for putting me in that position and so forth. And then the whole question of my morality, my ethics came into play. And all those questions that now we know are PTSD symptoms, I was asking myself and others. When I was in the Naval Hospital in Portsmouth, Virginia, that's where they sent me to recover. I picked up a book called The Way of Zen by Alan Watts. And the book spoke to me. Alan Watts, as you know, has his own flair and comedic kind of routine, but he makes the points. And one of the things that I was disenchanted by was God and religion in general, and my government and all those kinds of things. So I read this book and I started doing some practice. And over the years, I continued meditation, unschooled, of course, but I mean, at that time, there were very few Zen centers. This was 1966. I sat under a weeping willow tree in Miami every day until I moved. Anyhow, that's how I got to Zen. And it's how I got to the idea that we need to do something. At that time, nobody was talking about engaged practice that I could find. Thich Nhat Hanh was, I think he was still in Vietnam with his School of Social Work and so forth. And he's the father, basically the father of engaged practice as we understand it today. I found myself participating in anti-war demonstrations. I found myself participating in demonstrations regarding racism. Liberty City riots in Miami were terrible things, and I would go down there and stand with my brothers and sisters for years. I did that sort of thing, not thinking that it was any kind of special practice, understand, but that it was the right thing to do. And it was something that I needed to do, I think, to make myself feel worthy. Because the gunfight in Vietnam, the killing of not only Roundtree, but other human beings, I killed several people while I was there, was very challenging. And I felt an obligation to pay back, if you will, for the fact that I survived, for the fact that I had a home. But there was suffering, and there was suffering all over the place. People were really upset with the war. In 1968, that we had the Tet Offensive, everything started to change. The mood of the country switched over. Definition of the moral situation changed. instead of being a righteous soldier, I was now a baby killer. I went to the VFW with my father once, and the bartender said, "You're a Vietnam vet." I said, "Yeah." He says, need to get out of here. We don't want any crybaby Vietnam vets in here." And no, it was the American Legion office. And that kind of behavior led to a lot of confusion and a lot of anger and a lot of remorse and things like that. I think that one of the foundations of engaged practice is our sensitivity to suffering, that we have that sense of being a Kanan Bodhisattva, Bodhisattva that hears the cries of the world. And when we hear those cries, we have an obligation to respond, I think. And engaged practice is just that, a response to suffering. And it comes in many forms, anywhere from demonstrations and well, let me read you a little list here that I found in an article. Let's see. Buddhist ethics, meditation practice, blah, blah, blah. Social, in this area of social, political, environmental, and economic suffering and injustices. So pretty much that covers the waterfront, I think, in terms of the suffering that our brothers and sisters in the United States and around the world experience, especially over the last year or so with the COVID pandemic. People were terribly suffering. In isolation, parents had to have their kids at home. They had to be teachers and parents and everything else all in one. And they weren't working, so they were strapped for money. It was a terrible, terrible situation. So what to do when you touch suffering? The word compassion. We all talk about compassion often, I think, in the Zen Buddhist world, or the Buddhist world in general, talk about compassion. The root words for compassion are calm and passion. Calm means to be with, and passion means suffering. So compassion really means to be with suffering. And literally that, to me, that means joining the suffering, means being there with the suffering of people as they are suffering. It means going to a soup kitchen and serving, making soup, making sandwiches and handing them out. It means going to hospice. I did hospice work for a while, being with people who are dying and the families that are suffering as a result. When I founded the Order of Clear Mind Zen, I said that our priests had to do engaged practice, because I founded it on the third pure precept. I vow to bring about abundant good for all beings. You can't do that sitting on your ass in a cushion. And the Buddha didn't do that either. Remember, the Buddha got up off his butt and did something. He taught, he healed, he got between warring armies. He was an engaged practitioner. And somewhere along the line, we kind of forgot that, I think. Buddhists have been known not to get involved with politics and things like that. And when Thich Nhat Hanh started to address those things, I think he was kind of a lone voice. But he was a very passionate person and committed to ending the war in Vietnam. His demeanor, his smile, his gentleness, his slowness. I mean, he is contemplative in everything he does, walking, talking, opening a door, closing a door, mindful. and terribly compassionate. And it was, I think that spread. People wanted to be like him. He talked and spoke, and people responded. From him, others followed. And there are several organizations were developed to do engaged practice. Zen Peacemakers International, for example, one that I'm a member of. We do bearing witness retreats and things like that. Our members have done engaged practice in some form throughout the world, and we have a forum on the website. We have a journal on the website and so forth. In fact, the article about my story, I wrote a creative nonfiction story about that. It's published in their journal. It's a really good organization and very interesting. But it's a collective of people who have this desire to do something to make the world a better place, to actually actualize the third pure precept. I know I'm speaking probably to the choir here, but it's important, I think, for us when we take those vows, those 16 vows, we need to actualize them. We need to manifest them in the world. They're not just something we recite once a month or when we're ordained. They're something that is central to us, a manifestation of our true nature. So when we vow to cease doing evil, when we vow to do good, when we vow to bring about abundant good for all beings, what does that mean? How do we do that? Engaged practice is one of the ways that we do that. I had some of my priests worked in Folsom Prison. I taught meditation to kids in a juvenile detention center. Worked with a couple of different boards. One were homelessness here in Las Cruces. Served on boards. There are a number of ways that we can engage the world and help reduce suffering. But the first step, I think, is to engage ourselves. We have to look at ourselves, what our motives are, what's touched our hearts, what's important to us, what our values are, how we're manifesting the paramitas, how we're manifesting the vows, and so forth. Why? Well, one of the practices I did for a number of years was street practice. I sat out in front of the federal building in Las Cruces, downtown Las Cruces, on a cushion, on a zabuton and a zafu, in my robes, with a small sign that just said peace, block letters, peace. I sat on that sidewalk and did two rounds of meditation and kinhin in between, offered incense and so forth. I had handouts just about how to do meditation, how to do Zazen, cards for our Zen center, that kind of thing. It was bearing witness for peace, basically. What was interesting to me was at the beginning of that, which was around the Iraq invasion, people would drive by and give us the finger and stuff like that. They were angry that we were there. They thought we were anti-war. We are anti-war. But at that time, everybody was pro-war. Let's go get those people that knocked down the buildings in New York City, that kind of stuff. But over the years, it changed. And now when I go stand down there and sit, they honk their horns and wave. I know what I was going to say. Getting back to why we need to pay attention to ourselves. A lot of times when you're doing this kind of practice, people will come up and address you. I had a young man, well, not exactly a young man, he was a father, come up very aggressively to me as I was seated in Zazen. And I put my palms together and bowed. And he wanted to give me a tongue lashing because he thought I was against his son who had volunteered to go serve and fight in Iraq. And we got to talking. Actually, I got to listening to him, and I felt his suffering, his fear, his concern, and so forth. And I just listened. And then I invited him to sit down. And I taught him how to do zazen. And we sat together doing zazen for the rest of the time I was there, which I cherish that experience. It was transformative, I think, for him, but also helpful for me. I think it's probably time for questions. I'm a little concerned about time. Can you give me a sense of what the time is right now?
Yeah, it's 7:42, so we still have some time for the talk. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So a little background here. The term engaged Buddhism was coined by Vietnamese monk Thich Nhat Hanh in the 1950s. And he published a book at that time, A Fresh Look at Buddhism. While Nhat Hanh coined the phrase, Buddhists that engaged with social and political issues had already occurred throughout the world. In other words, there was a change going on in between the 50s and 60s. I think around the world that people were becoming more socially conscious, more conscious of the wrongs that were that existed, more conscious of sexism and racism and poverty and those kinds of things. I remember we had the war on drugs, we had the war on poverty, and I really just that language is distasteful for me. I don't think we should be having a war on poverty. I think we should be having a way to end poverty, but a war on poverty, why do we have to have a war on anything? Beyond me. But it's part of it is our addiction to violent language and violent metaphors in the United States. That's another topic. Okay, so he was inspired by humanistic Buddhism, reform movement in China, and so forth. This was a movement that was all-encompassing. It was going around the world. This is not new, though. Going back to 1946, Rahula identified an explicit social ethos present in the earliest recorded Buddhist teachings. And you can see that if you read the biographies of Buddha. He was a social activist. Now, that isn't to say that he was the kind of social activist that we have today sometimes, where people are jumping up and down and being angry and wanting to squash speech and things like that. He was more a listener, I think, more a doctor, a physician. He would try to diagnose the situation and address it in a way that was compassionate and understanding, and that both parties could agree to end the conflict. Today, we have, as I said, we have a number of organizations that do engage Buddhism and support engaged Buddhism. But I think that we may get off a little bit political here. We may have a problem because the left, which has traditionally been the political side that's doing the engaged practice, or progressive, want reforms, want to address medicine and food and things like that. They were getting, I think they got tired of not being heard. And so they have moved into, some of them have moved into a radical, more violent position, like Antifa, and squashing free speech and things like that. Getting universities to disinvite speakers because they didn't agree with them or because they thought the language the speaker spoke was toxic or something like that. And I think that's counterproductive. That's not resolving suffering. From my point of view, it's increasing suffering. It's increasing the polarization that we have in America right now. that's, I think, causing enormous suffering in our country. Not very Buddhist-like to try to overturn a police car, even though you may dislike the police. That kind of thing. It's not a model that I would choose to follow as a Buddhist. But I can understand it. I can understand that people are tired, that they've tried and tried and tried, and that the people haven't responded. It's frustrating. I know it was frustrating to me to work in the soup kitchen. It was frustrating to me to work in a prison. Anytime, well, and I was a social worker too. Remember, I should have mentioned that in my bio. I was a Child Protective Services social worker for 6 years and supervisor in a CPS unit. And my job was to investigate child abuse and to deal with the perpetrators and victims. 6 years of that was quite enough. Yeah. So anyway, then I opened up a private practice and did private practice with trauma survivors for the next nearly 30 years. But you know, you get tired. There's something called compassion fatigue. It's kind of like burnout. And if you're engaged in doing engaged practice in an intense environment, and you're fully committed to the practice, you can burn out in a hurry. You have to be careful, I think, about that. And that's part of what I mean when you have to engage yourself. You have to know yourself, know your limits, keep boundaries and things like that. You don't want to become a codependent sort of person who spends their life in service to others and does harm to themselves in the process. You don't want to do that. It needs to be balanced. Lastly, I think what I'll mention is that the Nat Han, in his order of interbeing, developed a set of precepts that are being adopted as precepts for engaged practice. And I'd like to go through them real quickly. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but just the main point. Number 1, do not be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology, even Buddhist ones. That's a good one. Remember that one. Do not be idolatrous about or bound to any doctrine, theory, or ideology. In other words, come at it with a don't know mind. Number 2, do not think the knowledge you presently possess is changeless, absolute truth. Because things change. Things change. 3, do not force others, including children, by any means whatsoever to adopt your views, whether by authority, threat, money, propaganda, or even education. That's an important one too. We are not here to proselytize. We're not here to convince other people that they're wrong. I think we do the practice to help people awaken to the consequences of certain behaviors, certain points of view, and to promote platforms that aid people, that help relieve suffering. Do not lose awareness of the existence of suffering. That's easy to do, isn't it? We can get lost in television and sports, and I often think that there's a book. What is it called? Anyway, they have a drug called Soma, and Soma makes everybody happy. We have a Soma of sorts ourselves: big screen TVs, pizza, beer, distractions of all kinds that help us forget that other people are suffering, including ourselves, help us forget our own suffering. We lose awareness of the existence of suffering, then we don't do anything. We become walruses sitting on couches, it seems to me. 5, do not accumulate wealth while millions are hungry. Do not take as the aim of your life fame, profit, or wealth. What are we alive for? For the sake of what do we get up in the morning? It's a good question to ask ourselves. It's a teleological question. It's an end state question. It's like Aristotle had 4 causes. The future cause was one of them, teleological cause. For the sake of what do we behave? For the sake of what do I get up in the morning and sit and meditate? Or involve myself in some kind of engaged practice activity? It's important to have answers to those questions. Do not maintain anger or hatred. One of the precepts we take is do not. Well, I frame it as do not give way to anger, because we're going to get angry. But what we shouldn't do is hold on to it. We need to let it go. We need to let it give way. Maybe understand it, process it, and use the energy, because anger is nothing more than emotional energy. Use that, channel that into something productive as opposed to destructive. Do not maintain anger or hatred. Do not lose yourself in dispersion and in your surroundings. In other words, don't get lost in the forest. That's easy to do. It's an overwhelming thing. And you go to a soup kitchen and there's 250 people in a line that need to be fed. It's easy to get lost in it, I think, and lose your awareness of what it is that you're doing and your humanity. You don't want to become a machine just handing out food. You want to talk to the person who's in front of you. How are they doing? Are they going to have a good day? What are they going to do that day? Something, a few words that shows that you see them. Because so many homeless people, so many veterans, so many drug addicts, they're not seen. We walk right by them. So do not lose yourself. Do not utter words that can create discord and cause the community to break. That's another hard one, I think. But it goes in line with our precepts, doesn't it? We vow not to talk of the ills of others. We vow not to elevate ourselves above others and things like that. Yet we have conversations about people. We're human beings. It's important, though, to pay attention to the words we use and how we use them, what tone we use them with, that kind of thing. That's engaged practice in itself, I think. Okay. Do not say untruthful things for the sake of personal gain or interest or to impress people. Do not use the Buddhist community for personal gain or profit. We should be nonprofit organization, one kind or another, but not for-profit organization. The money we receive, we should give back, use it to give back. And it might be giving back means paying for the toilet paper in your bathroom at the Zendo, or something like that, but not to put in your own pocket. Do not kill. Do not let, and this is important, do not kill, do not let others kill. Find whatever means possible to protect life and prevent war. That's important because we forget that the vow, I vow not to kill, has a flip side. If you vow not to kill, you're also vowing to support and nourish life. You can't have it one way. I'm not going to kill. You have to also support life and protect life. And I think sometimes we lose sight of that. Right? Possess nothing that should belong to others. Do not mistreat your body. That's the 14th one. Learn to handle it with respect. Do not look on your body as only an instrument. Preserve vital energies, sexual, breath, spirit, and so forth. These are the 14 interbeing vows that have been adopted by many engaged practice organizations. It's interesting. One of the articles I read in preparation for this evening listed people who were notable engaged practitioners. And one name was missing on the list. I really was surprised by. It was Bernie Glassman. Bernie Glassman Roshi had done engaged practice for years, working with homeless people, building buildings for homeless folks, teaching street practice, true street practice, where you'd go out without a wallet or a watch or anything else and have to spend 2 weeks on the street. That puts you in touch with what people go through being on the street. Yeah. Now, engaged practice doesn't have to be separate from your life. It doesn't have to be a special category. People can be employed in areas that are engaged, where they do engaged practice. Social workers, people like that, counselors. When you are working in a work environment, you can do engaged practice simply by being respectful and listening. Noticing when someone is suffering and offering them some kind of support. I like to think of it as simply being a helper in a lot of ways. Being a helper, a genuine human being. You know, a lot of people took the idea of survival of the fittest and ran with it. Social Darwinists do that. But yet, what Darwin actually said in his Descent of Man, Buddhists did a content analysis of that book and found that the idea of strength and over aggression was very small in terms of the number of references. What was huge was love, compassion, care for others. Toynbee, I think, an old historian, said that the civilizations that survive are the civilizations that take care of their infirm and their elderly, their poor. Think about that. Those nations, those civilizations that survive are those that take care of each other. They're bound in mutual aid, mutual love. To me, that's an incredibly important fact to remember, because we're faced with the idea that every time we come up with against a problem, we have to go to war about it, instead of finding some way to be compassionate with those who want to go to war with us, and so on. Okay, I think that's about enough for this evening.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Anybody has any questions or comments, I'd be glad to entertain them. I've said a lot tonight, rather incoherently sometimes, but that's the nature of this animal. So,
Great.
Please.
Well, Marlon, I think I see you've unmuted your mic.
Yeah, Aaron, thank you very much for throwing to me, and thank you, Roshi, Hilbert, for joining us. I'm going to do what I try to avoid and ask a very selfish question, but give a lot of context before I ask the question. I'm an elected official, or damn dirty politician, depending on what side of the.
You could call yourself an engaged practitioner.
Well, and that's going to be part of my question. Okay. But one of the reasons that I've been drawn to Zen is because in this role I hear stories of suffering from people every day, and it's overwhelming. You know, over the weekend I had 200 emails about people who are concerned about environmental destruction in Alberta, and I had one lady who has some severe mental health problems. She left me 20 phone messages over the weekend, 20 separate phone messages. And that's just 3 days in the life of me in my office. And so, I began practice of meditating, both in an effort to cultivate compassion, which is something that I struggled with before this job, but definitely struggle with in this job, but also to ward off the anxiety and depression that comes from hearing about people suffering every day. So there's that. that's why I'm here, and I'm very grateful that I found this group to support my practice, and that it's been very helpful in that regard. But when I heard you go through the precepts that Thich Nhat Hanh's Order of Interbeing set out, it seemed like a checklist of things that disqualify me from practicing as an engaged Buddhist and being involved in partisan politics, because you talked, or he talks about not being wedded to an ideology. Well, that's thrown out. I belong to a political party. We have a very well-defined view of the way the world should be. Not speaking ill of others. Aaron, I'm sure, is very gracious, and he won't bring up some examples, but it's something that I'm guilty of all the time. Bearing hatred and anger towards people that I regard as the enemy. These are all, those precepts are things that I really struggle with in this job.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking, I guess, what would your advice be to me?
Okay. First of all, it's important to be aware that this hearing and reading hundreds of messages a day and being called names and things like that can develop compassion fatigue. It can wear us out, burn us out, and so forth. We have to put them in a context. And I think maybe that's part of what you're struggling with. The precepts, remember, are not commandments. They are guidelines. They're principles that we work toward. It's kind of like when I was taking yoga, my yoga teacher said to me, Harvey, you need to go in the direction of the asana. Because I'm always trying to get there, I want to do downward dog perfect, but I'm 74 years old, I'm not going to do that. But if I go in the direction of it, that's important. So while you may be dealing with anger and hatred and all sorts of nasty stuff in the world of politics, you can keep a mind that is open to the understanding the suffering that the angry person who's angry at you is going through. I mean, one of the things that Nhat Hanh talks about a lot is that we're all human beings. When you look into your hand, you're looking in the hand of all human beings. We all have, as Maslow said, we all have common human needs. And so there's a reason that people get angry. There's a reason that people want to call you names, and that you want to call them names as well. What's important, I think, is that you do some reflection on just that. What's the motivation? What's underneath that anger? It may be perhaps that you feel in fact, you said it, you see these other people as the enemy. Change that mindset. I mean, you can do that. You can change that mindset. They are not the enemy. They are citizens. They may be deluded. They may be angry. They may be all kinds of things. They may try to hurt you, but they're human beings and they are motivated by something. Try to get underneath that and look at the motivation and begin to feel some compassion for them. And I got to say, that's really hard. When I worked in child protection, it was very hard for me to work with perpetrators. What do you do with a man who had sex with his 5-year-old? And feel something, a degree of compassion for this person, rather than wanting to put him up against the wall and shoot him. What I found was helpful was having someone I could go to and talk with and reveal the feelings that I had about the clients that I was seeing, the stories I was hearing, the kind of turmoil that was going on inside of me. Now that shouldn't be a Zen teacher, because I don't think a Zen teacher's role it's a psychological role. But it could be a compatriot of yours, could be a friend, it could be a therapist, could be some guy in a bar that you're able to talk with and openly talk with and not be afraid to talk with. To me, it's kind of a trite phrase, but compassion, what is it? Telling the true story of yourself is a relief. And maybe that's part of what you need to do. I don't know, like you just did tonight. I could say this, what did God tell Adam to do first off, almost first off in Genesis? What was Adam's charge? Besides, be fruitful and multiply. Anybody know? Go name all the animals. Now, why would he say that? Why would God ask Adam to go out and name all the animals? Well, he says in Genesis, he says, you'll have sovereignty over them. This is a psychological truism. The moment we begin to name the issue is the moment we begin to be able to address the issue. We can feel some degree of control. I think it's one of the mechanisms that makes AA work, for example. Hi, I'm Harvey, I'm an alcoholic. What are you doing? You're naming the thing. You're getting it out there, you're putting it out there, you're naming it. So what you did this evening, just now, was a first step at that, naming the issue, being transparent about it. You're not a saint, none of us are. We're going to be angry, we're going to be frustrated, we're going to be hurt, we're going to be pissed off and all that kind of stuff. We're going to want to whack somebody over the head, but we don't. Instead, what we do, I think, is look at our own humanity and their humanity. They're suffering just as well as you are. Somebody else have a thought or a question?
I'm gonna just unmute your microphone if you
Yeah, I'm open to chat. All right. Well, I guess I've answered everybody's questions about engaged practice.
Roshi, can I ask you, would you be able to just say a couple of things too about about your order and the Zen Peacemaker International?
Well, I did address Zen Peacemakers International a little bit. They have a great website, although I got to say it's not user friendly in a lot of ways. It's hard to navigate. But they promised that they were putting out a new site that was easier to navigate. But the organization itself is devoted to peacemaking. It's devoted to engaged practice. So when you join, if you go to join them, they want you to list the things that you're doing to do that. In order to join, you have to say, well, I'm doing this, this, and this as my engaged practice, in which I think is a good thing because they are what they say they are. They're peacemakers. But they also, I've talked to the executive director a few times, they're open as a group. Hell, they invited me to talk. I mean, they got to be open. I'm not exactly in the fold, so to speak. I've been marginalized a lot, but that's okay. I don't mind. And what was the other part? Zen Peacemakers and what else? Oh, my order. Yeah, that's we were founded in 2005, and we became a nonprofit corporation, a religious corporation. We are no longer that. I wanted to give up the government stuff, but when people come to us, I like to think of us as training ground for people that want to become priests in our tradition, but engaged Zen practice priests. I see our role as Um, Taking was what my teacher's teacher used to say, take the cushion with you when you leave the zendo. Meaning the mind that you have sitting, you should take with you. It's not like you go to church on Sunday and you're holier than thou and all that kind of good stuff, and you're going to go to heaven. And then the next day you do something horrible or hypocritical or something like that. This is a whole life practice. It's everyday Zen. Dogen talks about that. We often talk about everyday Zen. The idea that every moment that you're alive, everything you do is a Zen opportunity, or an opportunity to be compassionate, an opportunity to be caring, an opportunity to learn, and so forth. But you can't learn if you have a mind that's full of your own stuff. So we have to empty that mind. I like that story about the professor and the Zen master in Japan who poured tea in a cup and it overflowed, and the guy says, "Stop!" Well, you can't learn anything unless you unlearn some things, unless you're willing to do that. And we do a lot of that in our practice at the order. We insist on study in Zazen, but we also insist on some form of engaged practice and to bring it back to the Sangha and talk about it. Now, we've taken a hit, so to speak, over the pandemic. I had to close my temple, for example. Can't maintain a temple when nobody can come to it, and stuff like that. The space was expensive. We had a zendo, we had offices, we had bathrooms and kitchens and all that kind of stuff. So we had to shut it down. Maybe sometime or another we'll do that again. I don't know. But I found that this kind of meeting allows for the practice of the spreading of the Dharma with much more ease. I have people in other countries that are part of our order, in other states that are part of our order, and I find it satisfying in some way that that we have people doing things all over the place, that they're actually enacting our mission. I don't know, but we don't charge for anything. I don't believe in that. We don't charge dues. I don't charge anything for any ceremonies that I do. If people want to offer dana, fine, but I'm not asking for anything. I had issues with some Zen centers that charge enormous rates for sesshin and stuff like that. I mean, some of the centers you go to, they're $400 or $500 for a weekend plus dana to the teacher. I mean, come on, that's Zen for rich people. What about us guys who work for a living, who on minimum wage? Which is one of the reasons why we don't see so many black faces of people of color in our zendos. Who can afford it? Anyway, hopefully we're changing that Zen people are beginning to recognize that we have an obligation too, to deal with people of color, deal with poor people, homeless people, and stuff like that. I'll give you a quick example. We were doing a sesshin once, and we were doing kinhin, and somebody walked in the door and turned, and she was oh God, disgusting, to be frank. She had sores all over her feet. She was homeless. She was dirty, filthy, and I put her in the line and taught her how to walk kinhin, and then offered her food. And the group didn't know quite how to handle that because they were afraid of the infection possibilities of walking on the same wooden floor as she did. But this person was suffering and needed something. She needed help. She needed to be seen, to be heard. And so she became my student. And she would come and meet with me once a week, come to the Zendo occasionally for Zazen, things like that. But that's an example, I think, of how sometimes it's very hard because you have different opinions about it. We had Sangha members who really didn't want her there. And they were afraid. What can I say? But I'm the Roshi, so I get to say who gets to stay.
Rank hath his privileges, right?
Yeah, sometimes. All right, anybody else have a thought? I'm a nice guy, I'm not going to fight anybody at all. I have a Kiyosaki over there, but I really use it.
I'm going to take advantage of the time then, if that's okay.
Sure.
I have another question, and I want your thoughts on, what I've been learning about Zen is the emphasis on goallessness, right? Like keeping a beginner's mind, never really being attached to an outcome. Can you offer me your thoughts on how that can coexist with engaged practice? Because that's all about pursuing particular outcomes, in my opinion.
In a way it is, and in a way it's not, because it depends on how you look at the word attachment. I really dislike that word. I think it's probably a poor choice of an English word for what it means, in my view. I would prefer to use the word investment. I suffer relative to the amount of investment I have in keeping something the same. When I bought my motorcycle in 2014, my Harley Davidson, it was brand new. I was seriously invested in keeping that bike in pristine shape. It's not going to stay there. It's going to get a scratch. It's going to have a problem. Something's going to happen, and it's going to age. I got 70,000 miles on it already. It's going to age. Now, if I'm attached to that motorcycle, keeping it in pristine shape, then I'm going to suffer. What the Buddha taught was we need to realize that everything changes all the time. Everything changes. Everything ages. Okay. The aggregates will fall apart. And that's that. Look at it rather as how strongly you're invested in it, in something, in a goal, for example. Let's suppose, and a lot of people do, they come to Zen because they're angry and they want to learn how to not be angry, or they're stressed and they want to learn how to not be stressed. So they're coming to Zen for stress management or anger management or something like that. They have a goal in mind. But that doesn't mean that they can't learn how to let that goal go and make a transformation of sorts in them as they deepen their practice. Because what we learn, I think, through practice is that everything changes, that nothing stays the same. And if we can truly realize that, then we end suffering. It's like what the sutra says, no hindrance in the mind, no hindrance, therefore no fear. Far beyond delusive thinking, okay? The hindrance of the mind is the important part. The hindrance of the mind is our understanding of the world as we see it in relative terms, in dualistic terms. But that's not the only way to look at the world, is it? We can look at the world in an absolute sense. Everything is one. Everything is changing. Everything is eternal. Look at there's a story that I can't remember who said it. It might be Nahan, it could be the Buddha, about waves that are traveling toward the shore. And they're conscious, these waves. They have consciousness. And they see all the other little waves dying. Now they're attached to being a wave, right? I want to be a wave. I like being a wave. It's fun. but they see the waves are dying. Now, why are they suffering? They're attached to a form, are they not? They're attached to their self. And that's the self with a little s, not a big S. And when you're attached to that little s, you suffer. When you're highly invested in that little s, you suffer because the little s changes. It evolves. I didn't expect at 19 to get shot in the head and be paralyzed, but I couldn't move my left side. And yet, over time, the paralysis went away, and I was able to use my leg and my arm and some of my hand. Now, today, at 74, I'm losing my ability to use that leg and that arm. I'm becoming paralyzed again because my brain is aging and it's giving up its ability to manage the leg and the arm. So if you notice me walking, I walk like a drunken sailor. I stumble a lot, I fall, I have to use a walker sometimes. If I were attached to keeping myself the way I was when I was before I got shot, I'd be in trouble. I'd want to die because life would at that time did appear to be something I didn't want to live with. But learning that change is inevitable and facing that change with an open, not knowing mind. Let me back up on that. The not knowing mind is an interesting thing, I think. It doesn't mean that you don't know anything. It means that you try to understand something as it presents itself, instead of adding something to it. Okay, so you have a flat tire, and you're going to be late for work. The situation is you just have a flat tire, but we make it a problem when we think of it as a problem. Okay, when we think of it as something that shouldn't have happened to me. I'm going to be late. Oh my God, my boss is going to kill me. What are we doing? We're adding to the situation. Somebody with a beginner's mind would simply see the tire and change the tire. And if they can't change the tire, they'd maybe call for help. If they can't call for help, they'd walk. Something. How many cars do you see out there that's been with a flat tire for 10 years? Sooner or later, the tire gets fixed and the car goes away, right? So why, it's small stuff. Why sweat the small stuff when everything is small stuff? When we put it in a correct context. But I feel for you. I understand that the confusion about that beginner's mind stuff. But it's not about here, a different way of looking at it. What is this? What is it? Can you see it?
It's a teacup.
Okay. What is it before it's a teacup?
I don't. Clay of some kind.
Clay. And what is it before that? And before that? And before that? You see, teacup is just a concept that we are calling this. This is from the Dharma Sutra. We're calling this a teacup. Don't confuse the label for it for the thing itself. Not knowing you would be able to see that the label is not the cup. Okay? And because I see that the label is just a label, now I can call it a cup. You understand? Because I have clarity about what it is I'm expressing. You can't get that clarity unless you're willing to set aside the idea that you have about something. That's why we say, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. We mean it. Kill your idea of a Buddha. If you have an idea of a Buddha, you're never going to meet the Buddha. You're going to meet your idea of a Buddha. You see. I don't know if that makes any sense to you at all, but it's important to keep that sort of dialectical thinking in mind. You're presented with something, and the antithesis comes up, negates that, and then a synthesis arises over time. a new way of looking at something, a fresh way of looking at something. But you can't do that if you're convinced you know already what it is. Okay. Yeah, I feel I'm like dominating the space here. Anybody have another question or thought or something? As long as we have time.
I think we're getting a little close, Roshi. Unless somebody has something really quickly.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's cool. I'm cool. You're cool. Everybody's happy.
Okay.
No, I just wanted to say thank you very much. The story, like some people, yeah, your story from the Vietnam War. And I grew up it's just, the only thing was hearing the story of my grandfather, World War II. So thank you so much.
You're welcome, sir.
I wanted to ask you, I know, so in 2006, I went to see Barney Glassman, and he inspired me to run for the office. And it got me the trouble. All the troubles that Marlene was talking about. I got totally burned out. I was really burned out. The world of duality. Just recently, somebody found out that like I'm still like somehow so I remember people like Paco, Genro, some Mark, I'm not sure if you remember, these people, but then I didn't get to participate in street retreat or bearing witness retreat, but anyway, it's been part of the inspiration, but I'm not really sure if how would one stay a Zen peacemaker, or what defines us as Zen peacemaker? I mean, if you think about as a group, is there, like, I remember doing like some kind of retreat kind of thing, but is there still some sort of programs that they provide? Or
there are trainings available, but I want to say one thing about this. I think we can. Let me use an analogy. Often, as a therapist, I would have clients come in, and they had so many problems. It was like they had dark clouds all over this place. It was so dark, and they couldn't see a way out of the darkness. And they wanted all the clouds to go away right now. They can't go away right now. We have to take one little piece down, work it through, set it aside. Then take another piece down, work it through, set it aside. The idea that Zen peacemakers or any other engaged practice organization needs to solve a problem, we need to throw that away. What we do is we work it through. We work the stuff. As an individual, you can do engaged practice by yourself by simply noticing something and writing a letter. Noticing something and call the politician here. Say, I noticed that the train's not working on time or something. What are you gonna do to fix that? You have to. How do I say this? Practice opportunities are everywhere. They're everywhere. It's up to us to see them. And the only way we get to see them is if we have a mind that allows us to see them. And that mind, I think we train through the practice of Zen Buddhism, or the Zen Buddha way.
Right.
Okay.
Well, thank you, Roshi. I think we're at time. So,
okay.
Did you want to offer a closing echo, or did you want me to? Or?
Sure, I can do that if you like.
Okay.
Hang on a minute. Don't get old. It's not fun. Everything hurts. Shigu Seigan Shujo Muhen Seigando Mono Mujin Seigandan Oman Muryo Seigangak Mitsudo Mujo Seiganjo. Beings are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to end them. Karmic gates are boundless. I vow to enter them. The Buddha way is unsurpassable. I vow to realize it. Shujo Muhen Seigando Bono Mujin Seigandan Oman Muryo Seigangak Usudo Mujo Seiganjo.
Thank you again very much, Roshi, for your time and your talk. And I'm sure, we all very much enjoyed it and appreciate you taking the time to take questions too.
My pleasure.
And thank you everybody for joining tonight on with the group, and for those that are listening on YouTube and the podcast. So until Saturday.